Hello everyone and welcome back for some more Drag Race gossip, secrets and drama. So I'm back for another Have Your Say video, and this is for RuPaul's Drag Race All Stars 10 episode 9. So today we're going to be recapping the episode, going through the results of the Have Your Say poll, where you at home get to vote on whether you agree with the outcome of this week's episode.
We know!
And I'll be going through a little bit of light drama to do with a rumour that Denali refused to film her confessionals. And some semi-related interesting information that Denali shared in a recent video with Mistress Isabelle Brooks. All that and more coming up in today's video, so let's get started. Okay, so let's get on with recapping this week's episode. So this is obviously the last episode of this bracket, and it's the last sort of like proper episode before the semi-finals. The queens come into the workroom and there's a little bit of contention about the MVQ points because Betty feels that Alyssa was being a bit hypocritical because Alyssa said she was going to give her point to the person she felt was the most consistent, which Daya clearly felt was her, but then Alyssa actually gives her point to Cynthia Lee Fontaine. And this is kind of a recurring theme that keeps coming up. It also came up later in Untucked that Daya clearly felt some kind of way about this, and it kind of became a little bit of drama. And also Ginger Minge felt like particularly Alyssa was kind of undermining her win last week in the lip sync, saying they thought Denali should have won. So in general, there was a little bit of interesting drama this week, but I mean, it was nothing compared to bracket 2. So we find out that the main challenge for this week is an improv challenge called the Golden Tchelor. And this is obviously a play on what they did in All Stars 3, which was just called the Tchelor, but obviously that's a parody of The Bachelor. But when they were pairing the queens up and they put Alyssa with Ginger Minge, because they assigned the pairings, not the queens themselves, I did wonder if there maybe was, a little bit of riggery going on, given that I think Alyssa's track record in our improv in general has not been very good, whereas that's clearly Ginger's bag. So yeah, I maybe was seeing a little bit of production in some of the pairings, but I was very much looking forward to the challenge. Okay, so we're going to jump straight into the challenge, and what I'll do is I'll go through each queen's individual performances, and obviously the queens came in and did almost like an introduction with the Bachelor dog, which was the guest judge guy for this week. I can't remember his name. Personally, I'd never heard of him, but he's good looking, so who cares? And they did like an introduction bit, but then they also went on a double date. And I guess that was like the meat, if you will, the meat on the bone to do with the challenge. So I'll go through them in order in which they appeared. Okay, so we'll start with double date number 1, which was Acid Betty and Cynthia Lee Fontaine. Acid was playing the Doberman Dominatrix and Cynthia was playing the Anxious Chihuahua. So let's start with Acid first because alphabetically that works. I really enjoyed Acid in this role. I thought the Dominatrix bit was so funny. I loved when she kept saying sit and I was a bit like, oh, hello. So I was quite enjoying, I don't know what that says about me, but I was quite enjoying that. And I really liked that the Acid was leaning into this role. And I think it was also a perfectly cast role for her. I do think in the pairing, she was probably the funnier of the two, but I think she got less screen time, or at least from what we saw, because I think I got the impression that she was trying to help Cynthia out by giving her more airtime. We'll get on to Cynthia in a minute, but I think I wished I would have seen a little bit more from Acid, because I don't think I quite saw enough to make it a top performance, but what I did see I really enjoyed, so I would give it a yay. And in terms of the Have Your Say poll, also someone commented on one of my videos basically saying you don't need to say like the point numbers in your percentages, just say like the rounded number. So let's try that. So yay was 56%, just okay was 67%, let's call it, rounding up, and nay was almost 7%. Did you prefer that, or do you prefer hearing the points as well? Next in the double date, we'll move on to Cynthia Lee Fontaine as the Anxious Chihuahua. I will say also, as a general thing, I think some of the queens were given harder prompts and characteristics, which we'll get onto in a minute. I do think that the Anxious Chihuahua was quite a good one, but I feel like the way Cynthia went into it was kind of an unusual take in a way, but I think it kind of worked. I liked that she was doing this religious element. I do think it kind of put her into a corner a little bit, and no one put Cynthia in a corner.
Nobody puts baby in a corner.
But I do think it kind of painted her into a corner slightly, and I feel like we've seen queens try and do these kind of, conservative Christians who actually are not so conservative behind closed doors. Sometimes it can be funny, but it's actually, I think, kind of hard to do it. I think Cynthia was funny though, and I liked that she clearly had some lines prepared, like when they said, "Oh, you're the dog from the burrito commercial," and she was like, "No, it was a chalupa." I thought that was actually really funny. So I do think it was fun, but I don't think I laughed that much at Cynthia. So I think I probably would have to give it a just okay, because I think it was just so specific that there were some funny moments, but not quite enough. And it seems like you mostly agreed because you gave almost 45% for just okay. Yay got around 38%, and then nay got almost 17%. Then let's move on to the second double date, which was Alyssa Hunter and Ginger Minge. Alyssa Hunter played the frisky mutt, and Ginger was the alcoholic first responder Saint Bernard. Okay, so let's start with Alyssa, because alphabetical, again, it works. We all love an alphabetical queen. Unfortunately, I don't think Alyssa did a great job in this performance. I think she was really trying, so I would like to give her a lot of props, because I could see she genuinely was trying. And against someone like Ginger, who's a powerhouse, you're never going to be able to top that probably, unless you're also an incredible improver like Ginger is. So I did think they were kind of setting her up for failure by putting her with Ginger. I just don't think the characterization was there for Alyssa, unfortunately. I could see what she was going for, and I liked the outfit with the multiple nipples and everything and all the puppies. I thought that was kind of funny. But other than that, there just wasn't really that much to it. So unfortunately, I would have to give her a nay. And it looks like you did agree, unfortunately, because you said nay was 63%, just okay was 32%, and then yay only got around 5%. And then let's move on to Ginger Minge, who was the alcoholic first responder Saint Bernard. We all know that Ginger is an amazing improver, and I will say I do think she probably had one of the easier sort of personality traits. It very much reminded me, because she was doing this sort of drunk, maybe slightly cougarish woman. It was very much giving me All Stars 3 with what Bender LaCreme did, and a little bit Kennedy Davenport as well. But to me, that was so much of an easier prompt. I think everyone can play drunk. It gives you a lot to sort of work with. But I will say Ginger did an incredible job. She was maybe the only one that I genuinely was laughing at the entire time. She was amazing at the acting, the way she kind of held that stare with the guest judge guy, whatever his name is. And the fact that she was just so funny, dipping the meatball in the drink literally was so funny. Every part about it, you could tell she had really thought about it, and she created a real life believable character. So for me, this was definitely a yay. And it looks like you agreed, because you voted 74%. Let's call it 75. What's 1% among friends?
You don't have any friends.
But you voted almost 3/4 for yay, 21% for just okay, and then 5% for nay. Okay, moving on to the final double date, which was between Daya Betty and Denali. Daya Betty played the poodle delusional about her poop smell, and Denali played the needy emotional support spaniel. And again, because of alphabetical, we will start with Daya Betty. I actually really enjoyed Daya. I know on her original season, I thought she was actually quite funny in a lot of the acting challenges, and I think they did do an improv challenge. So I did think she might be good, but you never know, because I don't think we've seen that much of that side of her. It did definitely help that she was given the slightly bitchy character, and she kind of even said, well, that's who I am as a person. So I don't think there was much acting required in a lot of ways, but she was very, very funny. I really liked the characterization she had. She really was selling it to me, so I would definitely give it a yay. And in terms of the Have Your Say poll, you seem to agree, because you gave around 56% for yay, 35% for just okay, and then nay got almost 9%. And then finally we had Denali as the needy emotional support spaniel. I do think that Denali deserved maybe a bit more credit than she got in some ways. I will say, first of all, she started doing a British accent, and as the resident expert in all things Britishness and British accents, I feel like I'm in a good place to judge. I actually will say, I thought her accent was pretty good. I definitely knew what she was going for. It's definitely a lot better than some of the other British accents we've heard on Drag Race. I did actually once do a video where I went through all of the different British accents from Drag Race, and I kind of reacted to them and ranked them. So make sure you go and check out that video if you would like to hear more of my British expertise.
Can I have some water?
I actually did find Denali kind of funny. I will say, I know that they gave her some judges' critiques later on saying that they felt like she wasn't really playing the character because she was more nervous than needy. I will agree with that to an extent. Like she definitely, I think in the first interaction, the introduction bit when she came out, I don't think it quite hit the mark because it was definitely more nervous than needy. But in the second part where they were in the like jacuzzi thing, I think she definitely leaned into that characteristic a bit more, and she was genuinely funny. It maybe wasn't the most standout performance in a lot of ways, but I think she deserved more credit than she got. And I will say also, as another thing, I think she possibly got one of the harder prompts for the personality trait because it was kind of giving me Aja from All Stars 3 when she was given a character that was supposed to be needy, but she ended up just being kind of like annoying, I think, or that's what the judges said. And again, it is actually, you can see a lot of parallels between the fact that like Ginger got the drunk person and so did Ben de la Creme and they were in the top, whereas Denali and Aja both got quite a difficult personality trait of being needy and they were both criticized for it. So I think you can see a lot of parallels between that. So that's all I'll say. I think Denali was good though. Maybe not the best, but I'd give it between a yay and a just okay. And you actually didn't quite agree with this because you gave it more of a yay than I did. For me, it was between, but you gave it almost 56% for yay, so over half. 34.1% for just, 34, not, let's ignore the 0.1.
Literally, no one cares.
34% for just okay, whereas Nay got around 7, almost 7.5%. So I then asked you in the Have Your Say poll whose performance gets a slay, as in the best performance, and you voted Ginger Minge with almost 46%, Diabetti with 16.5%, and Denali was not that far behind with almost 16% in third place. And I'll definitely have to agree. Ginger by far was probably the only one that I really laughed out loud for, and she was genuinely funny. So yeah, definitely Ginger would get the slay for me in this. Okay, so let's move on to the runway for this week, and the category was paper dolls. Interestingly, Alyssa Hunter was the guest at Roscoe's this week, and if you'd like to find out more about that, make sure you go and watch my Roscoe's recap, which I'll link to in the description. Another little plug for you.
Oh, please, not this again.
But Alyssa did say that some queens who will remain nameless, Diabetti, apparently used fabric rather than just using paper. So Alyssa was saying some people could have like cheated a little bit. But anyway, I just thought that was kind of an interesting little tidbit. But let's get into the actual looks and we'll go through it in order in which they appeared, which was not alphabetical. Okay, so first up was Alyssa Hunter. I really enjoyed this look. I loved the colours of it, and she was talking about sort of like the cultural reference behind it, which was really beautiful. But I just think the colours in general were really pretty, because I think white and blue are just a classic colour combination that always looks good. And I really enjoyed her hair and makeup. So yeah, for me, this was definitely a yay. And it looks like you did agree, because you gave it 67% for yay, which was by far the majority, 27% for just okay, and then around 5% for nay. Next up, we had Ginger Minge. Now, as soon as Ginger came out, I could tell that Michelle was going to be like, because it's like Marie Antoinette. How do I say this? First of all, I will say, not everything that has a white face and is very ornate is Marie Antoinette. Like, that's not quite what it is. But it is more Rococo style, technically. But that isn't even what Ginger is doing. Ginger is doing, I assume, William Shakespeare, because that's the picture that's on her chest. And William Shakespeare was born, I think, like 200 years before Marie Antoinette. So they're not even in the same century. They're like 2 centuries apart. So it does kind of annoy me when Michelle says stuff like that, because it's not even historically accurate by any means whatsoever. But I will say I can sort of a little bit see where she's coming from. Not for this look necessarily, because I don't even think that was very Marie Antoinette particularly. But there have been a lot of Marie Antoinette looks on Drag Race, and I think it is getting a little bit repetitive. So I can see the sentiment a little bit, but not for this runway, because I don't think it's applicable. I actually really enjoyed this look from Ginger. It's not something I think you'd expect in a lot of ways, but I really liked it. And you could definitely see the paper element. The fact that she said that she sort of like chose all of these quotes herself and it was all to do with like drag and things like that. And it looked really well made. I was actually one of my favorites of the week, so I would definitely give this a yay. And surprisingly, you were more split on this than I thought you would be, or at least I wasn't this split. So you said 48% for yay, which was the biggest portion, but then you voted almost 40% for just okay. So it was almost not that different between yay and just okay. And then nay got 12.3. After that, we had Denali. I loved this look so much. That piece on her back, it was just so beautiful and so well made. That fox was so cute. And I know she said it's not just a fox, it's kind of a combination. It's also from like Mexican folklore, I believe she said. So it was just such a lovely reference, but it was also so well made. I couldn't believe that that was paper, and she looked beautiful. I loved the colors, everything about it. So yeah, this was definitely a yay. And I think unsurprisingly, you all agreed because you voted 87% for yay, so huge portion. Only 10% for just okay, and then 2.5 for nay for some reason. After that, we had Diabetti. I really enjoyed this look. It's very Diabetti because it's a little bit weird but beautiful at the same time. This was obviously the look, as I said earlier, that Alyssa Hunter at Roscoe said actually had a corset underneath, and then they sort of stuck the paper to it, so it wasn't 100% paper. Now, I'm not going to get into that because I feel like a lot of queens do stuff like that. It's still paper, and I really did enjoy the look overall, so I'm going to give it a yay. Again, you did agree, although maybe not as much as you had for Denali, because it was 68% for yay, still the majority, but not quite as big a proportion as 80-something. And then Just Okay had 26%, which is almost a quarter, and then nay was almost 6%. Then next we had Acid Betty. Out of all of the looks, I think from this particular runway, this one to me screamed paper doll the most. You could tell that it was actually paper and it looked the most like paper, but so well constructed. I loved the color, I loved the concept. Although some of the others had amazing concepts as well, the fact that I imagine that Acid probably made this herself, but you could actually see that it was paper. It really, to me, met the brief the most. So yeah, this was by far a yay for me. And unsurprisingly, this was another one that got a huge proportion in the vote. So it was 80, almost 82.5% for yay, so a huge part. Then it was around 15% for just okay, which was more than I would have expected personally. And then around 2% for nay. And then finally, we had Miss Cuckoo herself, Cynthia Lee Fontaine. Now, this look, I will say I love Cynthia so much. Like, she is probably my favorite contestant from this bracket. She is honestly so lovely. This look, I loved the concept behind it because she was saying it was all about, celebrating getting over liver cancer. And it was like liver cancer awareness, which the color green is for liver cancer. So I loved the message behind it. In terms of the execution, to me, when she came out, it just kind of looked like those balls of paper that you buy for like Christmas decorations or something like that. And she just kind of like took them out the bag and stuck them on her body. I don't know. I wonder maybe whether this was like a last minute outfit that she did. It didn't quite match up to what everyone else was doing. And I think the judges also called it out. She looked beautiful and it's actually a lovely color. I really like green on her. But yeah, this was not my favorite. So unfortunately, I would have to give this a nay. Perhaps unsurprisingly, I think you also agreed because you voted 72.5%, so almost 73% for nay, so that's a pretty big portion. And then almost 20% for just okay, and then yay only got around 8%. I then asked you who got the slay for the runway outfit, as in the best runway, and you voted Denali with around 34%. Acid Betty got 26%, and then not that far behind was Diabetti with around 20%. Although I did love Denali so much, it was a gorgeous look, I think I'm actually going to give it to Acid Betty, purely because not only was it a beautiful look, but to me it was definitely the most giving paper. It really did look like paper, so to me it matched the brief the most, but was also just a beautiful look in general. Okay, so we find out that the top two for this week are Diabetti and Ginger Minge. I asked you in the Have Your Say poll, do you agree with the top two? And you voted almost 68% for no, so the majority said no, and then only 32% said yes. So for those of you who did say no, I said, who did you think should have been in the top instead? And if we look at what you voted 56% for Denali and then almost 50% for Ginger Minj. But Acid Betty was not that far behind with 43%. So according to you, the top two should have been Denali and Ginger Minj. Ginger and Daya then lip-synced to a song I've personally never heard of called Mama Used to Say by Junior. Let me know in the comments if you know this song. I personally didn't. And Daya Betty is announced as the winner of the lip sync and therefore wins the extra point. I asked you in the Have Your Say poll, who do you think won the lip sync in your opinion? And a staggering 92% almost voted for Daya Betty, and Ginger Minj only got around 8%. So we then moved on to probably the most dramatic part of the episode, which is when the bottom queens, I guess you want to call it, have to give out their MVQ points on stage. And we find out that it was actually a really close call with it, and the person who got to cast, I guess, the deciding vote was Acid Betty, and Acid voted for Cynthia Lee Fontaine, which means that Cynthia Lee Fontaine is going through to the semi-finals along with Ginger and Daya. I asked you in the Have Your Say poll, who would you give your MVQ point to? And you voted 57% for Denali, so by far the biggest chunk. Then Acid Betty got 24% almost, and Cynthia Lee Fontaine came in third with 16%. I will say, and we all know by now, I love me some Cynthia Lee Fontaine, so I was genuinely so happy that she went through to the semis. I will say, in terms of performance throughout the season, or at least in their bracket, I can see why maybe Denali deserved it a little bit more, because in the sense that I think she performed slightly better than Cynthia. But I do think that Cynthia had people's heart, and maybe that's why I think she won. So I was very happy that Cynthia did win, because I also really love this storyline between Acid and Cynthia. And it was such a heartwarming moment. And I will say, this was probably the only bracket where the NVQ points actually made a difference. So I was very happy to see that it actually was giving some intrigue and drama rather than just being like a tick box exercise. And then finally, for the Have Your Say poll questions, I asked, which three queens did you think would make it through to the semi-finals? And the three you chose were Ginger Minj first with almost 90%, Denali got almost 89%, and Daya Betty got 83%. So from that, it looks like you thought that Denali was going to go through instead of Cynthia, because Cynthia only actually got 11%, which was second to last. Acid actually came up higher with 26%, and then Alyssa was in last place with just over 1%. And finally, in the Have Your Say poll, I asked you to rate this bracket out of 5 in terms of how much you enjoyed it, with 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. And the average rating was 2.55%. And we can see that most of the votes were in the 2 and 3 star category. I do wonder if these votes maybe reflect the fact that people thought that it was very rigged towards Ginger. Now, this topic has kind of been talked about to death with this particular bracket. Yes, there's been favoritism towards Ginger, and I think one of my Patreons actually said this a while back. The most frustrating part about it is Ginger didn't need it to be rigged in her favor. I think she would have done well regardless, even if she wasn't being favored. But I think people have let that favoritism, unfortunately, taint the bracket a little bit. I did enjoy this bracket, but I will agree the favoritism did seem very kind of eye roll, and therefore maybe made this one less enjoyable than the other two, which is unfortunate because I do actually really love this group of queens. I'm not sure if I would give it 2.55 though. I think I would give it like a 3, maybe stretching to a 4, maybe like a 3.5, probably where I would have placed it because I still enjoyed it. But I do think some people are just like letting their frustrations show with the favoritism. So we'll see whether Drag Race kind of takes this on board for next time. Okay, so let's move on to the comments for this week. We'll start with my Patreon comments, and I've grouped them in sort of categories because there was quite a lot of comments.
Praise the Lord.
And my Patreon member Elizabeth Ann said something similar to what my Patreon Kerry said. They mentioned the whole Michelle calling out the Marie Antoinette stuff, saying it's like calling the entire Rococo style because I don't like people emulating Marie Antoinette. And my Patreon Kerry made a good point that Michelle is calling out Marie Antoinette stuff, saying we see it all the time, but then we never say that about animal print and leopard print, which also we see a lot. And the topic of Denali not going through to the semis was obviously quite a big thing. My Patreons kind of had slightly differing opinions on it. For example, my Patreon Deb said, I think Denali is incredible, but I didn't get to connect with her like the others. And I think I did see some other comments from people saying similar things, that they wanted her to go through, but maybe she didn't show as much of herself as some of the other people. Whereas my Patreon Nikki said, I'm devastated that Denali did not make it through to the next bracket, but still happy for Cuckoo. And my Patreon Jessica also said, so happy for Cuckoo, which I am as well. My Patreon Max gave some very fearless feedback and said, this bracket surprised me. I expected not to like it because it contained my least favorite queens, but it actually changed my opinion on these queens for the better. My Patreon Yael obviously did not particularly like this episode, I guess, because said, well, for the first time in my Drag Race fan career, I skipped over the main challenge. And my Patreon Tyler made a comment saying they were surprised that Daya went through because obviously she was first out on her original season, and the fact that they chose her over Denali. Now, moving on to the comments in the Have Your Say poll, as you can imagine, the biggest topic, I think, from the comments was Denali not going through to the semis. There were so many comments from people saying that Denali was like robbed, and that's what they said, and don't see how Acid also didn't go through. And this then led into a very common thing that's happened throughout this bracket of people saying that it was rigged for Ginger, and then there was so much favoritism. People saying, for example, overwhelmingly predictable, the bracket was tailor-made for Ginger. And someone also made a fair point that I kind of touched on earlier, saying that favoritism has put a huge grey cloud over this bracket, or maybe for the whole season. And I do think, unfortunately, that's true. If Ginger does win the overall season, which could happen, I think now people are going to be less wanting Ginger to win because they felt like there was favoritism, which makes me feel sad because I do think Ginger is an amazing queen. Yes, there was favoritism, but as Denali said at Roscoe's, two things can be true. Yes, there is favoritism, but that doesn't mean that Ginger doesn't deserve it because she is genuinely a great queen. But let me know in the comments what you think. If Ginger does win, do you think it's going to kind of taint the whole season to be kind of bad because of it? Or would you accept the outcome because Ginger does actually deserve it? Okay, and finally, we're going to move on to some light drama involving a rumour which says that Denali apparently refused to film her confessionals. So, for many of the eagle-eyed among you, you may have noticed that at the beginning of bracket 3, Denali's hair in the confessional was much shorter than it was later in the bracket. And if you put the confessionals side by side, you can see that her hair is noticeably longer. Typically, the queens film their confessionals either at the weekend or at the end of the day, and this seems to vary depending on what season you're on, as queens have talked about this before and the answers tend to differ. But usually the confessionals are all filmed while the queens are still on set, and they're required to wear the same outfits so that they always look the same. However, people noticed that Denali's hair was much longer later in the season, and her hair can't have grown that much in just a few days, given that each bracket was only filmed for a week. So, multiple fan theories then started to emerge about what happened. People who noticed the hair change even said on social media that this must mean that Denali made it through to the semi-finals, but unless Denali becomes the wild card pick by one of the judges, we know from this episode that Denali did not make it through to the semis, at least based on the MVQ points. And while all of these theories about Denali's hair started to circulate, Willem actually spoke about this topic on an episode of her podcast Race Chaser with Alaska. Willem said that she had some tea about this. Here's the clip.
The facts are she did one day of interview for the first section where they filmed, and then they came back and filmed when all the girls got together.
Oh.
So she did all of her interviews, other than one day, when she came back. The reason you wouldn't do an interview while it's being conducted in the first heat was you would be busy. There were too many things going on. They just couldn't get to it. But you usually do it at the end of each day. She did not do that. And I do not know why, because I am not her, but I do know that she made it clear that she was not going to do that for whatever reason. So they got it the next time. There was a situation where it was parties were not pleased
Got
And
it.
you know how they play with the girls sometimes, and then the girls don't want to talk to the producers.
After this podcast came out, I noticed that several Drag Race social media accounts started saying that Denali refused to film her confessionals because she was angry that she didn't win the lip sync against Ginger. So she apparently filmed the rest of her confessionals later when the queens came back for the semi-finals. Now, this does somewhat sound like it could be true based on what Willem said. However, in the podcast clip that I played earlier, unless there was a different clip that I missed, I don't think Willem ever explicitly said that Denali refused to film because she was angry about not winning the lip sync. So I'm not sure where that part of the story came from. There was even an article posted by The Tab where they stated that before the season even came out, people on Reddit were posting theories that Denali, quote, threw a tantrum and stormed off stage and ended up reprimanded by RuPaul. Now, if you watch my Roscoe's recap from last week, which I'll link to in the description, you'll know that Denali was the guest at Roscoe's, and she did confirm that she walked off stage after the lip sync against Ginger because she needed a moment to compose herself, which people did notice when they watched the episode. But Denali never mentioned anything about throwing a tantrum or being reprimanded by RuPaul, so it's unclear whether several different rumours have been conflated together, or whether there is some truth to parts of the story but not other parts. I did see, however, that on Instagram, the user Drag Oddly posted about Denali's hair length change, and the caption of the post said that Willem commented about this, that Denali was upset by the result of the final episode, that she didn't want to record the confessionals. And in the comments on that Instagram post, Denali commented saying enemy territory, although it's not 100% clear what she meant by this. So it remains unclear whether it's true that Denali refused to film her confessionals and had to come back later to do them, which is why her hair was longer, or whether there was a completely different reason behind this. So for the time being, we don't seem to have a definitive answer. I just thought this was an interesting theory, which is why I wanted to include it in this video. But please bear in mind that currently this is unsubstantiated information, so please don't just assume that it's true because it may not be, and we'll have to wait and see if any further information ever comes out about this. Also, on a somewhat related note, Denali recently appeared on Mistress Isabelle Brooks's YouTube channel in a video titled The Most Robbed Moments in Drag Race History featuring Denali. In the video, Denali said a few interesting things, so I thought I'd mention them in this video. One of the things was that Denali seemed to confirm that she feels like she is a robbed queen, but she's not bitter about it because she knows how to work it.
Listen, if I don't come back for this wild card and I'm fully robbed for everything, I'll accept it because 4 years ago I was robbed. And this time around, if I'm robbed again, I've practiced it. I've done it before. I know exactly how to take this brand and push the robbery and give you guys everything that you want.
Another interesting thing Denali mentioned was that she seemed to imply that the season was rigged in favor of a few queens. Although she didn't say it directly, it does sound like she implied it. And here is the clip and you can decide for yourself.
I think that this season is very obvious. Everything that's happening and that, you know, the curtain is drawn back. There is no hiding what was the intended goal of the season.
What was the intended,
you know
what was the intended goal?
Celebrating a few, and that's what I'm gonna say, you know?
And I'll link to the video on Mistress Isabelle Brooks's YouTube channel in the description if you want to watch the full thing. But again, I just thought this was interesting information, and it does add some potentially interesting context on how the queens are feeling about All Stars 10, which is why I wanted to include it in this video. So there you go, there was the Have Your Say video for RuPaul's Drag Race All Stars 10 episode 9. Let me know in the comments which of the 3 brackets was your favourite, and who do you think is ultimately going to take the All Stars 10 crown? If you'd like to have your comment featured in my Have Your Say video and get a raft of other benefits such as personalised videos, shoutouts in my videos, the exclusive Patreon chat, early access and much more, please check out my Patreon. It just costs a few dollars a month and it's an amazing way to support my channel, and I'll leave a link to that in the description. Also, thank you so much to all of my amazing Patreons. Honestly, I appreciate you so much. You are all absolutely incredible legends, and your support really does make such a huge difference to my channel. So thank you from the bottom of my drag tea served heart. Please make sure you like and comment on this video, because just doing those two simple things really does boost it in the algorithm and help promote it to more people. And of course, please smash that subscribe button with every fiber of your being, because I would love to get to 150k by the end of the year. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you'll join me in future for some more Drag Race gossip, secrets, and drama. Thank you so much. Bye.